Once upon a time, there was a dinner party that took place in Memphis, Tennessee. I was speaking for a large national corporation, a franchise organization where you could buy a franchise, and if you were successful, you could buy another franchise and so on. And I was the keynote speaker, so they had me sitting next to a very nice couple. This couple, it turned out, had become millionaires. And the story that they told me was very interesting because they were the top people in the organization. And this is a true story. They had, he had been a fireman, she had been a housewife. They lived in a small 1,100 square foot house, 2 bedrooms. They had two kids in one room and them in another room. And he was a fireman and he made enough and they made a living and she stayed at home. And they worked through their teens and then their 20s and into their 30s. But they didn't have any real concern, they told me, because as soon as Aunt Martha died, everything would be okay. You see, they had an Aunt Martha who was very wealthy. And Aunt Martha had a husband and her wealth. And Aunt Martha had come over to their home and had dinner with them and Christmas and Easter and so on. And there were other brothers and sisters in the family. But Aunt Martha had confided to them that when she does pass on someday, that everything she has would be left to them. So they knew that when Aunt Martha died, they'd be rich. So he kept on working away, him at his job, union fireman job, not very happy. They didn't have much money. For them, a big night out was Arby's, and that was only once a month. But they didn't have to worry because when Aunt Martha died, it perished the thought, but when Aunt Martha passed on, they would be rich. Year after year went by, into their 20s, into their 30s, and Aunt Martha looked remarkably healthy. And they gave her gifts and sent her cards, and all the kids wrote letters to her, and they had her over for meals and so on, and they treated her very, very well. But you know, perish the thought, but you know, they're now in their 30s, and Aunt Martha is still just trucking away. She's in her 60s or 70s, and one day he looked at her across the table, and she looked back at him, and she said, women are wise, and she said, what if Aunt Martha lives another 20 years? There's longevity in the family. Are we going to be sitting here at this Formica kitchen table, worried about money for 20 years, waiting for Aunt Martha to die? And it hit him and it hit her, and they got so, it's almost like a flashbulb went off. They said, no. And they said, then let's start doing something. Let's imagine that Martha's going to live forever. If Aunt Martha's going to live forever, that is different. So they decided, they began exploring. He began working for what was turned out to be a janitorial service in the evening. Then he bought a franchise from ServPro, and he built the franchise up, and he found he had a natural knack for it. And so he built another franchise, and he called it. Pretty soon, he was running it. His wife was running it out of the house. Pretty soon, after 2 or 3 years, he quit his union job, began working it full time, built up a whole series of franchises. He was a millionaire. He was a great success. When he went into that organization, they did everything but throw flowers in his path. He was a symbol of what was possible for an average person to create a wonderful business. He and his wife were confident. They were well-dressed. They were warm, friendly. Everybody liked them and so on. And they said, and if we had not made that decision across that kitchen table, we'd still be there in that little crummy house. I said, and what's the rest of the story? The rest of the story was that Aunt Martha lived another 20 years. And when she died, all the other members of the family, the brothers and sisters on both sides, they'd all been waiting for Aunt Martha to die. And when they got there to the reading of the will, and they were talking, all the others were confident. They were there, they didn't care, they were wealthy. All the others were confident because Aunt Martha, turned out, had promised every one of them that they were her favorite, and she was leaving all her money to them. And when they read the will, Aunt Martha was penniless. She had no money at all. She'd been broke for years and living off the good graces of her relatives by telling them she was going to leave all her money to them. Now, there's a reason that I tell you the story, aside from the fact that it's true, is what is your Aunt Martha? You know, what are you waiting for to happen before you go for it? You know that in life, successful people just commit. Has anybody played Texas Hold'em? You can admit it. Okay. In Texas Hold'em, they have, and by the way, it's a remarkable game because there's something in there that appeals to the American imagination, is you reach a point where you're down to the point where you cannot raise, you cannot bet, and you have to go all in. If you don't go all in and take a chance of losing it all, you'll be wiped out. Every so often you see a person who wins because they went all in with weak cards. Have you seen that on the World Championships of Poker? You push all the money in. Nobody can bet higher than your whole pot, but if you lose, you're finished.